Hello, and welcome to MIT Sloan Alumni Online. Every month, MIT Sloan Alumni Online brings you the latest breaking news, cutting-edge research, groundbreaking ideas, and school updates from MIT Sloan faculty and alumni. Today, we have Bryn Panee Burkhart with us again for a presentation on salary negotiation tactics. Bryn is the Senior Associate Director of Alumni Career Services here at MIT Sloan. She provides Sloan alumni with career guidance and coaching, including job search strategy, positioning on resumes, cover letters, LinkedIn, intelligent networking, interviewing, and salary negotiation. Bryn came to Sloan in 2006 and has been our dedicated alumni career coach since 2012. Bryn, we're pleased to have you joining us. I will now turn it over to you.
All right, thanks, Greg. Hi, everybody. I hope you're doing well. Thank you for joining me for your lunchtime as we get to our last career webinar of 2018. The year's flown by. I know if you're like me, you're probably feeling like there's a lot going on before the year closes out. So I appreciate your taking the time to be with me today. All right, today's webinar is a follow-up, as you see here, to the June webinar I presented on compensation conversations. And I wanted these two webinars to really stand on their own. I understand from the marketing material around this webinar that it did say we advise you to look at compensation conversations ahead of time, but if you didn't, you're fine. I will refer you back to the video, to that webinar for some parts of, during some parts of the presentation, but this is going to stand alone. One thing I want to say is that, and actually let me just say this too, you will see some slides from compensation conversations here as well, because the content, as we talk about preparing for negotiation and the stages leading up to a salary negotiation, were relevant to June's webinar, and they're going to be relevant to today as well. Okay, so to start, salary negotiation is not one size fits all. So I want to be clear that today we're going to be talking about salary, which is very personal. It has to do with your own specific personal situation. When you're negotiating salary, there will be a lot of variables, the specific state of the market at that time, to the situation and the specific state of the company with whom you are speaking. So all of those things will affect your ability to successfully, whatever that means to you, negotiate compensation. And because I cannot, possibly cover all the different scenarios that could occur, today's webinar, when we get to salary negotiation, is going to be geared towards best practices and general guidelines. My goal is to help you position yourself from a place of strength. If this is the first webinar you have seen that I've done, if you go back and look at the prior three, you'll see that's the theme for me. I really want you all to learn how to manage your career with intention and with purpose. And so my goal today is to help you be purposeful and intentional about managing your salary negotiations. So let's dive in. Ooh, my slides are... Let's dive in. Let's see if I can control these slides. There we go. All right, here's our agenda. There we go. These three things. We're going to cover the three stages of salary negotiation: research and preparation. Then we'll move into actively discussing an offer, and I'll wrap it up with best practices for accepting or declining the offer. Okay. Now, I'm going to go back a little bit to what you saw in compensation conversations here, because before you can effectively negotiate your salary or have any real meaningful conversations around compensation, it's critical to do some research. So you need to get a handle on the salary ranges for the roles that you're aspiring to get to and or roles that might be different from what you're currently doing. So you want to figure out what your value is in the market, as well as the comparable market value of the role that you're targeting. And when I talk about comparables, I gave this analogy last time, but it holds again. It's similar to when you buy a house. So before you buy a house and before the bank agrees on a mortgage, they're going to look to make sure the value of the house that you want to purchase is in sync with, or a fit with, or comparable to the market value of similar houses in the neighborhood or the area. So it's the same thing with your professional value. How does the talent that you bring compare to the other talent that is in the marketplace at that particular time? So if you're moving to a similar role or making a lateral move, your current salary can be a good comparable for you to have. But if you're shifting, what you're currently earning may not be a good comparable. So what are some other points of reference? So let's look at those right now. So for more recent graduates, I am wanting to point you towards the alumni, or not the alumni, but the full-time employment data that our office puts out on recent graduates. And I'm really excited to say that for the class of 2018, our median base salary rose to $135,000 a year for our new graduate, which is great news. So for those of you newbie alums who are watching, I would encourage you to take a look at this because it's fresh, hot off the presses. We just released it in the last couple of weeks. And this will help you kind of get a handle on where you might be standing in the market right now. For our more senior alums, this may not be relevant data, but it's really good intelligence nonetheless. Now, sometimes you can find salary surveys based on your industry that will have relevant information. To obtain these, I would say look to the major professional association or organization that's tied to your industry, as that's a good starting point. They might house those resources, or they can at least point you as to where to find them. You could also do, like a Google search for salary information pertaining to a particular role, industry, or function. But my note of caution is to, of course, check the sourcing, the methodology of those surveys, any surveys that you might randomly find online. Now, external recruiters, if you have relationships there, can be really good source because they might be knowledgeable about compensation practices for the industries in which they specialize. I know many of you might get random taps from time to time on LinkedIn from recruiters who want to chat. I do encourage you to possibly use these if you're inclined to probe, use these conversations if you choose to engage, to probe on relevant salary ranges. And the last webinar I did in June actually gives you some dialogue and a strategy on how to talk to recruiters or how to talk when you're more of a passive candidate and they have contacted you. These are my personal favorites, informational interviews and insights from colleagues. They can give you excellent, reliable data. No matter how many years of experience you have, no matter what your level is, you should always be cognizant of your strengths and actively thinking about the work that you want to do. You should also be thinking about who in your network you should be speaking with that can give you insights to how you want to progress in your career, roles, companies, industries, people who have knowledge around those things, or people who can connect you to the people who can give you insights to where you want to go next. You've heard me say this before as well. You want to build your network before you need it. It all goes back to kind of that intentional approach to your career management. So capitalize on informational interviews and informal conversations with colleagues and those in your network to get salary data. Now, I'm not saying that this is the first question you're going to ask them, right? But a neutral question like, what do you think one could expect to earn in this role is perfectly acceptable. It's okay to say in an informational interview, what are your thoughts on the salary range? Oftentimes, people think of this as a deeply personal piece of information, and they're uncomfortable bringing the subject up. So I totally get there's a delicacy around it. But if you probe with the intention of just gathering data and doing research, rather than tell me what you make or tell me what you think I might get paid, right? If there's a different approach, there's a different intention behind that. If you do it with the intention of gathering data, it can yield some really valuable information. And if it's someone that you know well, that you're comfortable with, if the context is right, another way you could approach this is to think about sharing your salary or your salary range and asking for people's reaction. Obviously, this is going to depend on how the situation is going or how the conversation is going, but the idea here is that if you give up some information about yourself, it takes the onus off of having this type of conversation. So if you're willing to go there, then maybe they'll go there too. Maybe someone may even reciprocate and share their salary, or just give you more information about the company's compensation practices than they'd originally intended. So if it's done respectively or respectfully, having this type of conversation can really pay off, right? Pardon the pun. Okay, so last market value source is job descriptions. Some job descriptions, you can get some insight into salary ranges. This is really more typical for nonprofits and then industries with unionized workforces. Then there's online data, and in my last webinar, I singled out what you see here, transparent career. So unlike some of the other salary-focused platforms like all of these, Transparent Career started by specializing in MBA salaries. Last year, we did a pilot project with Transparent Career in 5 other peer business schools: Stanford, Chicago, Kellogg, Columbia, and Harvard. And we asked our MBA class of 2013 to enter their salary history since graduation onto the Transparent Career platform. So there is a relevant data set there, not only the MIT Sloan alums who responded, but also the alums from the other 5 schools. And I would definitely recommend that you check this source out when you're doing your market research and your benchmarking. In a tangent here as well, we're actually in conversations about doing another alumni compensation survey with Transparent Career, but this time broadening the set of schools that will participate, increasing that, as well as doing all graduation years. So I'm really excited about that, and this is my plea to you to please respond if we do this, to enter your data. So we have a richer data set, and we can all benefit from that. All right, the last, back to my webinar, the last thing I'll say here is that each of these platforms have their own nuances and their ways of kind of showing data, as well as the data they're gonna ask for you to input. So I would just dabble in all of them, if you're doing some research. The one disclaimer though, is that oftentimes online sources like these, because the data is entered anonymously and cannot be verified, are not always credible when you're bringing them to a company's attention. So this should just be one part of your research. All right. Now, once you've done that market research, you're going to want to clarify your position in the market. That will enable you to confidently go into discussions around your salary. And once again, I'm going to use the example of an alumna who was pursuing a senior product manager position in the tech sector in a bigger firm than where she currently worked. Just a little bit about her background. She's got 5 years of post-MBA work experience in a product management role, first at a large insurance company, then did a short stint at an internet that didn't get off the ground, and then is now at an internet-based retail company, but really wants a more senior role. Okay, so looking to move up in the same functional role. So here are the various sources consulted to get comparables on her market value. So you see here, networking contacts, online sources, a salary survey done with a retail product management association. So when you do your work, your research, when you have your conversations, you could plot it all out like you see here. And there are other variables I could have chosen to add to this. You could be looking at geographic location. You could be looking at years of experience. But for simplicity's sake, I've just put this in a chart with a very wide range that's anchored by salaries I found on Glassdoor for both average performers and then top performers. The meat is really in the middle, coming from more credible sources. So it would be too wide of a range to tell someone, my market value is anywhere between 135 and 220,000. But by getting sources from informal conversations and recruiters who can give more credibility, or give more credible numbers rather, this alumna can figure out where to anchor herself. You also want to consider this factor as well, which is her current base salary. I mean, that is essentially her market value at this time. But what we want to think about is what's the market value for the role that she's aspiring to get to? And so for that, I'm going to suggest proposing this target salary range of between 185 and 200,000, and that she use those numbers when she's talking about the roles for which she is trying to get to. Now, the logic here is that you want to anchor high, but you also need to be fair and you need to be realistic. And if you look at her current comp, what I'm suggesting here is about a 20% jump, which is it's a big jump, or it's a pretty big jump, but it's reasonable, right? It's fair, but it's also a little bit of a stretch. Okay. So how do you apply this to yourself and your own personal situation? So ideally, you're going to invest the time to do this research before you're even interviewing, right? But if you know that you're getting ready for an offer, you definitely need to lock this down. So as you prepare, you need to first define your position in the market, similar to this alumna that we just discussed. You need to do that for yourself. And I recommend that you do that benchmarking and then get a handle on what the proposed salary range might be for the role that you're interviewing for. Another component to consider is the potential employer. So during the interview process, you're going to get a better understanding of the company. You might also do research prior to the interview about the company, but that's that's interview prep. So you're going to want to be thinking, what's their growth been like? Has there been news about the company or financial events that might impact their growth trajectory? What's the reputation of the company? What's the size of the company? All those things are going to factor into their compensation practices, right? And an early stage startup is certainly going to pay you probably more in equity, not as much in base salary than a larger established Fortune 500 company. In my June webinar, I laid out how companies go about setting their compensation structure. So you're going to want to do some research on your potential employer or employers, and keep these things in mind during your conversations and during your interviews so that you can realistically set expectations. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about the employer perspective later. Now, after all this research, what I recommend you do is set 3 numbers for yourself with regards to the positions that you're interviewing for. You're going to set a baseline number. That is basically the bare minimum number that you would feel comfortable accepting, given your situation, given your position in the market. Okay, so the bare minimum number. Then there is the fair market salary number, and that middle of the road, that baseline on that survey chart, it was anywhere I think from 165 to like 200,000. And then you're going to think about your ideal number, the number that you would be thrilled if you hit, but it may not be realistic. So the important thing about this is that it gives you an anchor. When you're going into salary negotiations, you need to have an anchor. You're going to know a point at which you would walk away, and that's really important to know. The fair and the ideal numbers will guide you as you do your negotiations and you have your discussions. But proactively, consciously choosing these numbers is going to give you more clarity. It'll give you more confidence too, but it's also going to allow you to negotiate in good faith, which is, it's critical. So, in addition to the numbers, we also need to talk about you as a candidate and what you're bringing to the table. Again, you're going to prepare before your interviews. You're going to be able to talk about yourself and think about yourself, but this data is going to come into play in your negotiation strategy too. So it's really important that you are locked in and clear on your strengths and how you can bring them to bear for a new role with a new employer. You might remember, if those of you saw my first webinar from February, Navigating Your Career at Any Age and Stage. If you haven't watched this, that's going to guide you on really how to do this work. The next question, because you're now in interviews and you're talking with a specific company with a specific role in mind, is, what problems need to be solved here and how can I solve them? If you can state the answer to this question clearly and succinctly during salary negotiations, it can be a compelling reason for a company to meet your terms when you get to the negotiation stage. And then finally, it's critically important for you to frame all your salary discussions in a way that show you understand the employer's needs, that you have a relevant skill set to meet those needs, and that you can add value to the company. All right, water break. All right, so I want to talk briefly about salary discussions and what may come up in the interviews process, because that's going to give you a clue as to how much leverage you're going to have when you get into negotiations. Leverage, critical part, right, of any salary negotiation. So as you go through the interview process, you and the employer are basically exchanging information. you are trying to assess what a fair offer might look like. You're both, this is when I would tell everybody, go back and watch the Compensation Conversations webinar, because that gives you actual dialogue to use when you're in all these different stages of the interview process that you see here at the top of this slide. So information that you will likely share that might impact your leverage. Well, first of all, your unique value proposition. That's what we just discussed in the prior slide. Your strengths, your contributions. If you can show that you're uniquely qualified for the role, you have a strong track record, you check all their boxes, that's going to give you leverage. You'll also be sharing information about your current employment situation. So whoever you're interviewing with is going to know if you're employed or unemployed. Now, if you're employed, the company might have some insight into that company's compensation practices, the practices of your current employer. That could possibly impact your leverage. You may be asked, or you may choose to discuss your career trajectory at your current company. If you disclose that you're highly valued, if it seems like your company will fight to keep you, then that employer, the potential employer, is going to know they're going to have to make a very attractive offer, because they're going to need to compete with your current employer. If you disclose that you're not satisfied with your current position, or it seems you're desperate to get out, the company's going to take note of that as well. If you're not employed, you don't typically have a lot of leverage, which is why I'm sure you've heard this said before. You know, it is easier to have a job while you're interviewing for another job. It gives you a little more leverage, but it's not necessary, because if you're unemployed and you're interviewing actively and you have different firms that you're talking to, and you seem to be a hot commodity, this will give you leverage. So all these little things will give you clues to the advantages you have when it comes time to get to the negotiating table. You're also going to be asked about your salary history and expectations. And this is where, again, my last webinar guides you on how to do that skillfully and confidently in a way that helps you maintain your leverage. I do want to point out that some states are passing or have already passed laws that make it illegal for companies to ask about what you're currently earning. So typically a company will ask your expectations rather than your current salary or your salary history. Just make sure that you check the laws in your region of the world. And then finally, you might be asked if you're interviewing elsewhere, and that information could give you some leverage in negotiating. If the potential employer knows you have options, they're going to know they might have to compete for you in the marketplace. On the employer side, the most important thing you'll likely learn during the interview process is the salary range. You may also be able to learn why the position is open. If they need to replace a critical role, that could give you more leverage than if it's a new role and there's no precedence there. And as you're moving through the interview process, just take note of everything you're learning from all the different conversations you're having. That's going to help you figure out their sense of urgency, the time frame for hiring, and even where you stand in the process. Maybe you'll hear the role has been open for months. Maybe you'll hear they're not in a hurry and they're waiting to find the right fit. Maybe you'll learn they're interviewing other candidates or finalists for this particular position. Maybe you'll learn that you're a good, strong candidate. If you hear something like, wow, you have a really great skill set, we think you could add a lot of value, you know you're going to have some leverage in your discussion. All right, so let's pause here. Just take a moment, because we're wrapping up the research and preparation part of the webinar, and I want to just review all the things we've covered so far. We've talked about the lead up to salary negotiation and the market research that's critical that you do. Making sure you clarify your position in the market and define your market value, and therefore set those number thresholds, those dollar thresholds I discussed. In the interview process, it's really important to be keyed in and locked into what you bring to the table, because that's going to help you position yourself effectively. And you also need to be picking up clues around your leverage, which you'll then use when you set your negotiation strategy. Okay, so now we're going to move into active discussion of the offer. And I'm going to take another water break again. It's very dry in this office. All right, so to set the stage for that, I'm going to bring back an image that you've seen before. Now, I want you to check your mindset. That's why I want you to look at this image. I want you to check your mindset as we begin to talk about the active discussion of a salary negotiation. As with all things in life, the perspective with which you approach something will likely make it true. So if you go into salary negotiations, or if you're thinking with salary negotiations that it's going to be like this image, right, which conjures up kind of oppositional, confrontational, kind of challenging discussions, it's going to be that way for you. And there's a better way. So we'll move that to the side. And I want you to change your perspective. I invite you to approach compensation conversations and salary negotiations as if you're on the same side of the table as the employer. They made you an offer, so assume that they're motivated to have a constructive, collaborative discussion. What I found is that companies do expect you to negotiate, and while they do need to maintain internal equity, they want you to be happy about joining their team. So more often than not, there are always exceptions to this, but employers will try and show some type of flexibility and work with you so that you can start off on the right foot, so that you can both start off on the right foot. So if you can keep this perspective, this mindset as you actively discuss your offer, I'm going to bet you're going to have a better experience at the negotiating table. So let's talk about getting an offer. Congratulations, you have an offer. Awesome. Typically, this will be done verbally, either in person, maybe, or over the phone. But I have also seen people get a heads up that they're getting an offer, and then the offer is emailed to them so they can review it offline. And an offer can either be proposed. So it could be teed up as, you know, we're thinking about a base salary of $200,000 and a target bonus of 15%, or it could be firmer. So it could say, we'd like to extend you this offer of 200,000 K base, 15% bonus. Okay. So many companies do that verbal offer first and do not process official paperwork until they have an indication that you're going to be amenable to their terms. That signals that there's a potential for you to negotiate there. So what do you do? What do you do when you receive an offer? The first thing you do is you say thank you. Express appreciation for the offer. Even if you're not thrilled with the number, you just say, I appreciate the offer. I'd also recommend that you take this time to add that you're confident about your ability to contribute and reiterate that unique value proposition we talked about. This helps cement for the employer that you're also focused on what you can do for them, not just what they can do for you. So this is bringing you on the same side of the table. You might be asked for your feedback. The company is going to test the waters here and try and get an idea about what you're thinking. And what I say is, unless there is something like glaringly wrong or right about the offer, I wouldn't give immediate feedback. So if the salary is much lower than you've been led to believe, or if they hit your ideal number, you know, you could express your concern or delight about it being a fair offer. But typically, after thanking them, let them know you'd like to take some time to consider the offer in its entirety and propose a time to circle back with them. Now, in my last webinar, I introduced a formula that I also want you to use in this situation. And basically, it's making a statement, asking a question. So I'd like to take a few days to look at everything and discuss it with my family. Can I circle back with you next Tuesday? Statement, question. So this gives you the opportunity to establish the timeline by which you must respond. And it also volleys the question back to them. They can say yes or no. Now, if they want to talk sooner, if what you proposed is not to their liking and they want to do sooner, you keep using it. You're going to have to manage it, but you keep using that formula. Statement, question. I hear what you're saying, but I really need to look at the offer in its entirety, and we'll need a few days to have time to discuss it with my family since they're going to be impacted by my decision. Let's meet in the middle. Can we talk on Monday? So statement, question. That keeps the conversation flowing. That way you don't get to that standoff, that opposite end of the table image. Okay, so now, what else did I meant? Okay, so ask for time, got that bullet. So now let's move into, you know, how am I going to set my strategy? This is where it gets deeply individual, because what is most important to you is not going to be most important to someone else, right? So you really need to think about it. Given this age and stage of my career, what is most important to me? This is also, if you go back to the navigating your career webinar that I did in February, we talk about your require and desire list. So these things will come into play as you're thinking about your negotiation list. Now, other than a strong compensation package, I want you to kind of think about other things that might be important to you when you enter into salary negotiations. I think about it being in 3 buckets: money, time, and then some miscellaneous items. Let's go through these now. All right, on the money side, most people have a priority of getting their base as high as possible. So if you get a salary offer and the base is lower than you expected, or it's not at the higher end of the range, this will likely be your first piece of negotiation. There's also a one-time signing bonus that you could ask for if the company can't move on the base salary. Or maybe you ask for an increase in the percentage of your performance bonus so that you're not impacting that sacred salary structure. Sometimes there's actually more flexibility on the bonus potential the higher you go, the higher up the food chain you go than base salary. Some people earn out, their bonus potential far outstrips their base potential. So everything is very personal to your own situation. Perhaps there are other forms of equity or long-term incentives you could negotiate, like stock shares that would increase the value of the total comp package. And again, equity also can surpass base, bonus, and so you're going to move to incentives to get that comp package higher if you need to. Also on the money side, you could ask for increased or fully covered relocation expenses. Other things might have a time horizon. You could ask for an earlier review, say renegotiating your salary at 3 months or 6 months after you've proven yourself rather than having to wait a year. You could also think about increased vacation days, a particular start date or a schedule that would benefit you, or the flexibility to work from home. Other things that might be important to you, you could ask for a title change or professional development. Perhaps you want to get certified in something or take classes that would directly and positively affect your ability to do your job. And then finally, for more senior level positions, you might have the ability to negotiate, office space, get that corner office, or, ask for more resources that would benefit your team, get more headcount. Non-compete or non-solicitation agreements could also be brought into the discussion as well, but you would, of course, want to consult an employment lawyer before to review the language before you brought this as a topic. Now, I will say that employer-wide contracted benefits like health plans, 401k matches, those are typically not negotiable. So it's not prudent for you to bring up, can you change my 401k match to match my current company? However, what you can do and what you should do is look at your current benefits package that your current employer gives you against the benefits package of the potential employer and note any discrepancies, because you could use those to make the case for additional compensation. So it could be something like, actually my current employer provides a 7% 401k match and pays 100% of my healthcare premiums. Is there flexibility to adjust the compensation package here to address that difference and keep me whole? So again, note how I teed that up. I made a statement, I asked a question. What's really most important when you're looking at all this is prioritizing your particular needs, your particular wants, given your age and stage. Going back to that required desire list, I always recommend when you lay out the items that you want to negotiate on, you obviously are going to start by negotiating either base bonus or equity, whichever is going to maximize that total comp package. And then from there, you go according to your order of importance. So if you're going to negotiate, it means you're going to counter their offer. You've gotten the offer, you've told them you need some time to think about it, and now you have to talk. Okay, so let's talk about points to keep in mind when countering the offer, and then we're going to dive into some of these in more detail. So first off, you want to ask any questions you have that need clarifying around the terms of the offer, things on benefits, or whatever you still need to know. Next, you're going to make your case and give the reason why you're asking to negotiate the initial offer. We're going to talk about that in the next slide. Then you're going to lay out all the items you want to negotiate on, and I do recommend that you present them all at once in priority order. So, for example, I'd like to talk about base salary, and I also have some questions around the relocation package and the vacation time. So there are a lot of moving parts, and for the employer, each piece is not necessarily independent of the other. So you need to be upfront and let the company know all the items to discuss that are going to impact whether or not you accept the offer. Okay, so like corner office space, if that's not going to impact the yes or no, it might be a nice to have, you're not going to present that first. So what you'll do is you'll discuss all the points you want to negotiate on because it will influence whether or not you accept the offer. That's going to help the company understand what they need to do to get you on board. If you recall that last slide, the bargaining mix slide, you likely saw offers, or not offers, you likely saw items that kind of seemed cool to you, but they might not affect your decision to take the job. So what you want to do is you want to keep those contingent items later. Make note of them. You might need to bring them to the discussion later. And to that point, I see the word BATNA up here. Hopefully you've heard of that before. It stands for Best Alternative to a Negotiated Agreement. So those are items that you use and will come into play if you cannot successfully negotiate your must-haves. So your BATNA comes into play when, for example, you don't get the salary you want, then you're going to ask for the earlier review, a 3 to 6 month revisit, okay? So when you know you're going to likely accept or you have to accept, but you're really just trying to get the offer to be more palatable, that's when you bring in your BATNA. You want to look at alternate options because you couldn't get the first terms you were trying to negotiate. So once you begin these discussions, really important to show some flexibility. Employers are operating under a variety of constraints, internal constraints, and they may need to get creative in order to address the compensation requirements that you've asked for, that you put forth. You'll recall that every company has their own compensation philosophy and therefore compensation practices. So for example, I know of like a large asset management that caps large asset management firm that caps base salaries at 130K, but their bonus potential varies wildly. Right? There's another large asset management firm I know that is very, very flexible on the base salary, but very rigid on the bonus structure. So you don't always know what's going on behind the scenes. So once you've stated what you're looking for in terms of a total compensation package, give the company some flexibility to come up with a solution and address your needs. I've worked with alums before with salary negotiations, and they get because this is very personal to them, they get very locked into if they can just give me more of this and less of that and more of this, and they get into trying to advise the company on how to make it work for them. But this actually can come across as being pushy rather than helpful. So remember, you've got to be on the same side of the table, be respectful, give the company an opportunity to come up with a solution, okay? So throughout it all, you need to remain positive and on the same side of the table as a negotiator, keeping that perspective of it being a collaborative discussion, a collaborative effort. And know when you're countering that the way you conduct yourself when you counter is paramount not only to your success in negotiating the offer, but also to your reputation as a new hire. So let's go to building your case. I talked about giving the reason why. This is basically providing the employer with why you are asking to improve their offer. So strong reasons for improving an offer include the market research you've done. That's why that preparation phase is so critical. You're armed with data. Another reason is that you have alternatives. You don't have to leave your current employer, or you have other opportunities for which you're interviewing. So employers know there's a marketplace for talent, and they're going to have to compete for that talent. If you're able to show it is advantageous for you to remain at your current employer, or if you have other opportunities that are equally competitive or more competitive, this is an incentive for the employer to move in your favor. And then finally, your unique value proposition can once again come into play. If you bring a rare skill set, or if your talents command a premium in the marketplace, or if you've gathered insights during the interview process that you are the right fit for them, you can use this to your advantage. Weak reasons for asking for more for an improved offer. Typically those that are based on feelings or emotions rather than your value in the market. So if you feel that you're underpaid in your current role and you deserve more money, but you can't find data to back that up, that's not a good reason. You're not going to have a case. Or if you're using reasons that are really personal to you, I need to pay for childcare, I have to move, I'm getting divorced, I need to repay my student loans, these are going to ring hollow for employers. So it's really important for you, again, when you're leading with intention and purpose, to ground yourself here and know why you're asking to negotiate. So how do you ask for more money? So let's revisit that formula of make a statement and ask a question. I'm going to give you an example here using those stronger reasons I just gave for you to make your case. So this is what you're going to do. You're going to say this or something like this. You're going to make a statement. Based on my market research or our prior discussion on compensation or my current career progression, insert your strong reason here. You're going to ask a question. I'm wondering if it's possible to move the needle on the base. I would say that and I would be quiet. The rule of negotiating is to make your ask and zip your lips. Don't talk even if the silence is killing you. You need to stay calm. You need to stay confident. And because you've asked a question, they have to respond, right? So that's why you're having this flow back and forth. So perhaps the company will probe, and then you can talk a little bit more about the reason that you cited. You can provide the market research, or you can bring out your unique value proposition and talk about how you're going to solve their problems. Or you can talk about the prior, conversations you'd had with the hiring manager or someone else that had given you reason to believe there was going to be a different type of comp package. So this is where all that research, all that preparation we talked about comes in handy. You need to stay cool. You need to stay logical. Do not apologize. That's really important. Some people will ask for more money and then apologize. Like, why are you apologizing? You need to be coming from a place of strength. So do not apologize. Do not show emotion around it. You're advocating for yourself. You've prepared for this. Now, one of the best ways to increase your advantage in an offer negotiation is by offering the employer some certainty. So if you want the job, if you know you would accept it, if they meet your salary requirements, you could give them some indication that you would accept if they meet those numbers. So for example, given the market research I provided, I would feel comfortable accepting if you can get to a 200K base and that I have flexibility to work from home once a week. Or maybe you say something like, if I stay at my current employer, I'm actually going to be making $200,000 by the end of the year. So if you're able to increase this amount by 10%, I would happily accept and join your team. So note in these examples, I'm actually stating a reason, okay? Only do this if you're serious. Don't ask an employer for more money unless you know the point at which you would accept. And that's why it's so important to have those dollar thresholds. If you ask for more money without having a number in mind, you're not negotiating in good faith. And that can come back to bite you in the end. Show integrity if you're going to use this tactic here of giving them some certainty. And again, when you're asking for more money, it's important to be seen as appreciative and also flexible. Now, for those of you who are actively seeking and interviewing at multiple firms, it can get a little tricky because you won't always have control over the timing. So here are a few thoughts on how to manage the process with integrity and hopefully still have it work to your advantage. First of all, you want to keep employers apprised of the timing of your other interview processes you're in if these are opportunities that you would actually seriously consider. So think about your intention here. It should be to show transparency and courtesy to the employer, not to give them a threat or an ultimatum. If you're close to the offer stage with one company and still in the interview process with another company, but you're really interested in moving that interview process along so that you might be able to compare offers, then you should just let that company know that you're getting to the end of another interview process and an offer is forthcoming, but you'd really like to be able to have the opportunity to consider this offer too. So what you need to know is you can state that, but then it's really out of your control. It's, the company may not be able to speed up or slow down their process just to suit you. But companies will always appreciate your being upfront with them, and it signals good faith. You don't need to provide specifics on the company if you're concerned it's going to negatively impact the discussion. So if you're interviewing with companies in two very different industries, or if you're interviewing at an early stage startup, as well as a big Fortune 500 company, you may get worried this could cause the company to wonder like what you're doing and are you really focused. So you really do need to appear to have a focused search. So if you're asked to provide some insight to other opportunities that you're considering, that you've got in play, you should give some general information and offer like the similarities between the opportunities you're considering. Maybe it's the same functional role, just two different industries. If you have a clear preference for one company over the other, it can work to your advantage to tell this to the company of choice. So if they know they're your first choice, but you have other options, they might be more likely to work with you and negotiate with you. And again, this all needs to be done with sincerity and integrity. So you would tell the top choice firm that you're most excited about their role, but you're also going to lay out your negotiating points and be clear that if they can meet them, you would likely accept, you'd be inclined to accept. So when you use that certainty again, it can give you some leverage. And then finally, if you've had compensation conversations with multiple companies, you can play these off of each other. It is okay to ask one potential employer if they can meet or exceed the offer of another potential employer, but you can only do this once. And in these situations, you may need to actually give more info around the company name and the role. So it's more tangible for the employer, it's more realistic. Again, it's important to check your intentions here. You're trying to get the best deal for yourself, but you want to show integrity. If you can use that certainty ploy, and say something like, if you're able to match this other offer, I'd be inclined to accept and join your team. Then you're giving that company some incentive to work with you and move in your favor. Before we get to answering an offer and wrapping it up, I do just want to touch a little bit on the employer perspective. It's important to remember during this process that if you've been given an offer, they want you to accept it. I said that before. They want you to be happy. The recruiter wants to close out the requisition and make a good hire. The hiring manager wants somebody to come in and start solving their problems. Employers do expect negotiation. You can and you should always counter the initial offer. I just don't think there's anything to lose here. So I would love to see more people negotiate. Only 37% of people negotiate their salary. And in my experience, and I think the data shown elsewhere too, what I have found in working with alums is that our women are more hesitant to negotiate than men. And that's why it's so important for you to shift that perspective of salary negotiation as being, kind of two people on the opposite ends of the table doing a tug of war, and really shift it to being more collaborative and an idea where you're advocating for yourself. You're ensuring that you're being paid fairly. There's a real strength in that. No one can advocate for yourself better than you. Don't give up that power to anybody else. It is okay to ask for more money as long as you're professional and respectful. The worst case scenario is that you're told no, and then you see if they can move on any of your other negotiating points, or you move to your BATNA that we discussed earlier. Companies are also still evaluating you throughout the process. So if you're unprofessional in your conduct, or if the employer feels you're not negotiating good faith, this is going to cause them to question whether or not you're the right fit for their organization. I have only seen this happen twice, but it's happened. I've seen offers rescinded because of poor behavior during the negotiation stage. And then finally, while you might be their first choice because you've gotten the offer and the company wants you to be happy, there might be constraints that are going to prevent the company from meeting your request. Maybe there's a strong backup candidate and they know they can get him or her at a lower price point. So if you become too expensive, they may need to go to their plan B. Maybe there's strict compensation brackets and the company has practices that won't allow them to meet the terms that you've asked for. Maybe the hiring manager's compensation is on the lower end and that's going to impact your ability to come in on the higher number. or the higher end. These are all things you may or may not know during negotiations, but it could make it difficult to get to a negotiated agreement. All right, so we're moving towards the end here. So congratulations, you have made your decision. Let's cover best practices around accepting or declining an offer. So when you arrive at mutually agreeable terms, you're going to accept the offer verbally. That way they can hear the enthusiasm in your voice. It's just a nice human element. You're going to express appreciation, and then you're going to make sure to get the written offer if you don't already have it. I would have you consider having an attorney review any agreements that you're not clear on, non-competes, confidentiality, whatever. Make sure you understand everything before you sign an offer. Do not resign from your current employer until you've signed your offer, and preferably until you've negotiated your start date. This is going to keep you safe from any unforeseen circumstances that might occur. And then talking a little bit about declining an offer. Sometimes you have to decline an offer, but if you have handled yourself professionally with transparency and integrity, if you've shown flexibility throughout the process, you can avoid burning bridges. If the company is unable to meet your requests, you're going to thank the employer for the opportunity and let them know, unfortunately, since you couldn't come to a mutually agreeable terms, that you'll have to decline. Just keep it short and sweet. Wish them well. If they have met your terms, but you've decided you don't want to work for them, or you're going to go elsewhere or stay at your current employer, it's important to just be transparent and be clear about the decision that you've made. Show appreciation, stay positive, don't ever say anything negative to the employer about that company. The world is small, and you want to avoid saying anything negative because it's going to keep your professional reputation intact. All right, guys, we did it. So I'm going to just bring back this green elephant, this elephant covered in dollar bills. When I opened up the compensation conversations webinar, I talked about how talking about money can be very uncomfortable for people. It's like the green elephant in the room. Here's my green elephant. And what I would like to say is I hope that both the June webinar and this webinar has made the subject of compensation less intimidating and less confusing. There's no more elephant in the room. You're going to be empowered, I hope, to have these discussions, do your research, and approach any conversations from a place of strength, knowing that really you are the only person who can best advocate for yourself. So keep that perspective of being on the same side of the table as your potential employer, and it will increase your chances of having a more successful salary negotiation. So thank you very much. I am happy to turn it back over to Greg.
Great. Thank you, Bryn. As a reminder to our participants, please type in your questions in the Q&A panel in the Zoom interface. And while you're doing that, I'll take a moment to tell you about some upcoming events. So we are excited to sponsor a webcast of the upcoming MIT Sloan Retail and Consumer Goods Conference taking place this Saturday, December 8th at 8:30 a.m. And the theme for this year is Winning the Customer War. So you can register for that webcast on our website. And then into the new year, we have faculty member Paul Osterman, Professor of Human Resources and Management, who will be talking to us about, his presentation will be titled, Who Will Care for Us? The Coming Crisis of Long-Term Care. So you can register for those sessions on our website, and you'll also find links to previously recorded sessions. So now our first question for Bryn, and Bryn, you touched on this a little bit in the bargaining mix slide, but for someone who feels like they would want to renegotiate a salary, maybe they've just started in their position, 2 months, 3 months in, how might you suggest they approach that in a newer role?
Okay, so from what I'm hearing, it's you've already done your initial salary negotiation and you've decided to accept, but 2 to 3 months in, you're thinking, I really want to renegotiate. Is that, yes? That's kind of what the,
right. Yep.
The question is. So, okay, so I think here's the thing. If you accept a salary, well, I would hope that you would try and use that as a baton, right? So if you weren't able to negotiate the salary you wanted, that before you accepted, you actually brought up, is this something that I could bring up for discussion 3 months in when I've shown my worth, when I've proven my value, okay? So that's the first thing. I would always try and do that. 2 months in, unless you have done work that is way outside what the original scope of your work was done, or you've just killed it on a project or done something, I find it to be a little difficult to come back 2 months to 3 months after accepting an offer. I would at least wait 6 months. That's just me. There's no hard and fast rule here, but you want to think about the company perspective too. If you all of a sudden start asking for more money 2 months in when you just had a salary negotiation, that can reflect poorly on you. So I think about always checking your intention. I said that several times during the webinar. Why am I doing this? If you weren't able to get the BATNA that you want, that's why you really want to do the BATNA first. And if you weren't able, then I would wait at least 6 months before having a discussion with your hiring manager about the kind of the indiscrepancies in your salary. And you might even use that time to do a little bit more market research and give you some data to back you up when you make that request.
Great, thanks, Bryn. And like you said, it's really important, it seems, to be upfront when you're first negotiating the offer to then set the stage for that future conversation, whether it's 3 months, 6 months.
You have more leverage before you accept the offer. Your leverage is before you accept the offer.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you. Now,
sure.
switching gears a little bit, and we were talking about this a bit before the webinar, but thinking about issues around gender parity in the workplace and salary, it's a huge topic, of course, and one we could have a whole separate webinar on this. But for someone who's thinking that maybe their salary is not up to par or not on parity with male peers, how might an alumna approach that conversation?
Okay, so this is where doing the research on the company's compensation practices might be helpful. Now, fortunately, there's some great things happening in the world. Companies like Salesforce and Starbucks have committed to doing gender equity and salary parity. So I would have that conversation when you're in kind of those final stages, or even when you get the offer, and just ask them, one of the things that I'm really committed to, or that's important to me, that's probably the better way to say it. One of the things that is important to me is that the company has gender parity in their salary. Can you tell me a little bit more about the compensation philosophy of this company? So notice, again, I'm using the make a statement, ask a question formula, so that you're really having a conversation and not putting somebody on the spot. That's probably how I think about teeing it up.
Great, thank you, Bryn. And now, a last question, I think, to close us out as we're getting close to time. For someone who is, in the negotiating phase, how do they know when enough is enough? Now, certainly that's a very personal thing. And so you mentioned someone knowing kind of their base and their ideal salary, but how would you gauge from the employer perspective, when you've pushed too far or asked, kind of the top of top of what they may offer?
Well, you're going to know if you push too far if they say no. So, I mean, I think but to the points that I think are important, really what's important about that question, it's a good question, is, you're going to be armed with, your idea of those dollar thresholds. So you're going to know the point at which you're going to walk away. You're also going to kind of have an idea around what might be fair and realistic for the company and for you. So you have every right to ask for something that's fair and realistic, or even the dream number too, if you can give a good reason, if you can make the case. That's what's important. We're dealing in facts here, not in emotion. But I think if you're showing integrity, if you're being professional, if you're asking, you're doing the make a statement, ask a question, then that's really, as long as you're doing that, you're conducting yourself with the idea of it being a collaborative, constructive discussion, then things are okay. When it's breaking down and it's becoming more of the oppositional, then that's going to give you clues to, is this company even the right cultural fit for me? Or, is this company one that's going to be transparent and say, we just can't meet those terms, but here's what we can do, right? So if they can't make the salary you're asking for, that's why you have your BATNA. That's when you can go to, increased flexibility, or, work from home, or whatever else is more important to you. And when you've gone through your BATNA, that's when you're going to decide if they're not willing to move on anything. Remember, I said companies will try and be flexible. Maybe they can't move on salary, but they can do a different title or something like that. If they can't move on anything, then you need to decide, is this feeling right for me? And that's when you know you might need to walk away.
Great. Thank you, Bryn. Thank you for another great program, and we appreciate you joining us again for Sloan Alumni Online. I want to thank all of our viewers for joining us. To keep this conversation going over social media, please use the hashtag SloanieChat. Following this event, you will receive a survey via email, as well as a link to the recording. So please fill that out and let us know your feedback on this session, as well as our ongoing lineup of events. As always, you can reach out to us at sloanalumnionline@mit.edu. Thanks again for joining us.
Thanks, everybody. Happy holidays.